Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Let's Debate. While we are getting back to basics here on the channel, I figured I would Bane back.
A masked man called Bane.
I figured I would bring back a fan favorite series here where we have some opinions around a topic given, and I give my thoughts on said opinions. And we get into a bit of a debate here, but not an argument. This is friendly. We're just having a conversation. Note, there are going to be more unorthodox videos here on the channel eventually. I know I'm referring to that way, but anyway, if you would like your bookshelf to be roasted, all you got to do is go ahead and join the Discord channel. Go ahead and submit your bookshelf in the Bookshelf Roast channel, and I might get to just flaming it in the next week or two. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's Let's Debate! With the specific topic around the sci-fi fantasy genres in the hyper-modern sense. Basically, anything 2020 onward, what are your opinions in this newest era evolution and maturing of the post-indie boom for these genres? So let's go ahead and get into our first submission here. Remember, I asked you to upvote the controversial takes, and then I respond to the most upvoted ones. Do people stop just upvoting stuff they agree with? Let's go ahead and see. Special editions almost never add enough value for the inflated price. I don't think you're wrong. I think a lot of special editions are, especially on like the mass market level, extremely underwhelming. I mean, I have given how many editions of The Wheel of Time just horrendous feedback on what they're trying to shovel out in a half-hearted attempt to get like the deluxe edition market approval. That's why I tend to recommend like the few companies that I see consistently putting out what I would consider well above average. Fortunately, with the printing costs coming back down to normal in the like post-COVID era issues with the whole like shortage for paper and everything, I think we're seeing more reasonable prices return, but I personally would rarely spend over $60 on a special edition of a book. It's one of the few areas where I still like in today's modern, every company just shells out crap type environment where I find like brand loyalty still has value. You need to find people who make special editions that you actually like and then stick with them, because otherwise, oh, there's a lot of shit out there.
That is one big pile of
Parents who complain about their children not reading are never readers themselves. If you want your child to pick up a book,
lead by example.
Pure laziness to expect your child to do something you never do yourself. This is, like, I agree to an extent, but you're speaking in absolutes on something that, you know, isn't necessarily going to be like 100% all the time. I mean, I was a special case myself. I was very dyslexic, so I was terrified to read for a long time. And it wasn't until I had a really good tutor who kind of made me competitive with myself that I really started getting into reading. And that was despite both of my parents for my entire life having been avid readers. Granted, my mom will be the first person to tell you she is the slowest reader on the planet. I think it's taken her over 2 years to get through Way of Kings. But if she even finished it, I just stopped checking it at a certain point. But if we are speaking in general, I actually think this has a pretty good point behind it. I have seen people who do nothing but read scrolling on their phone, expect their kids to just find a love of reading on their own. And yeah, that's not how that works. Especially when, you know, people do genuinely read on their phone, it's kind of hard to share that you're doing that specific thing when the person just sees you scrolling on a phone. And so like, that's why I think there is still value to things like actual physical books. It's even beyond the enjoyment of reading from paper, which is a genuine tactile feeling thing I enjoy. But beyond that, like holding a book and reading it in public, as stupid as it sounds, is a social act. And it can, yeah, convince someone to read more. It also can have someone come up to you and say, oh my God, I love that book. And well, I have recently made a video where I talked about, yeah, e-readers in general, way more useful than I thought. They will never make up for that lost aspect. It sounds counterintuitive, but reading publicly with a book, in terms of my life experience, is one of the most social things you can do. It tends to invite conversation, and I've never had that happen while reading off a tablet or a phone or an ebook. Oh, from OSP, go check out their channel, they're amazing. The cold take. Publishers want new and exciting ideas for their books, but are rarely willing to actually take a risk with an unconventional story or author. This results in a homogenous sci-fi/fantasy space in the traditional market. The hot take: most readers do the same thing. Even people who acknowledge the real new stuff is in the indie space rarely venture to it. The hottest take: this is because too many indie books suffer from spotty writing tech. So the enthusiasts who would appreciate the new ideas will be even more attentive to a greater level of writing mistakes. I don't know if you put May takes here on purpose. That's really funny if so. It makes taking the plunge for cool new stuff less appealing. The literal sun. Ultimately, this is fine because nobody is perfect, and we should be able to appreciate aspects of books while recognizing it may be uninventive or technically flawed without letting it sour the overall experience. Daniel, if you disagree with me, then it's because you know more than me. XOXO. I think there's only one angle to this I actually disagree with. Your point on readers is true, but I think is shifting. We are seeing more and more mainstream readers willing to venture into non-traditional spaces, partially, and it pains me to say this, I hate that I have to give Amazon credit here, because more and more indie type reads are getting more and more into your face, especially with stuff like Kindle Unlimited. It's crazy common for people to not even realize today that they're reading an indie book because they don't check for publisher marks. If it's just on Kindle Unlimited and recommended to them, they go, okay, and they pick it on up. I would bet some indie smash hits have a decent sized percentage of their audience who don't even know it's an indie hit. Writers are becoming so bogged down by self-advertising. They are spending more time on social media versus actual writing. It's a self-destructive wheel, and no one actually follows each other anymore. It's numbers, not people. Everyone is too consumed with being seen that no one is actually watching. That's just a lot of vagaries that I feel like are not true. A lot of the authors we see with the lowest output are not very active on social media, and some of the authors we see with the highest output are extremely active on social media. This just kind of seems like a vague, like general, easy to like, social media bad opinion, but social media addiction is a very real thing. I've tried to quit X/Twitter several times and failed, and it absolutely does ding away at my writing time. But does that mean that it's consuming away and oh my god, this is just why we're not getting these books we've been waiting so long on? No. One angle to this I do agree with is yes, we are seeing authors asked to do more self-advertising all the time, for sure, but not to the point where I feel like it's detrimental on an industry-wide level of like causing a mass slowdown in publication. And beyond that, even if that did happen a little bit, there's too many books in the world already for me to read and review. Slowing down the fire hose of, have you read this yet? I'm not even mad about it.
I also just want to say that this is seeming to take like an overall just immediately negative view of social media, which I understand is popular right now, but there is an incredible upswing to social media in the author community as well. Authors are comparing notes, collaborating, and practicing together in ways that were not possible before. And yeah, there is a screen addiction problem in our culture, but I think it's outweighed still on professional benefits like this, where you're able to have these communities that not only uplift others, but can provide support and education on a scale that was previously impossible. So I would say, like, sure, maybe it's slowing down some authors' output a little bit if they personally are dealing with screen addiction issues, but perhaps the quality of their writing is overall better because they're able to learn lessons and improve their craft, like, in a way previously impossible.
No matter what preferences you have for genre or trope, you should semi-frequently venture outside your usual zone. You will learn something about yourself. For sure, I will always encourage people to do that. But if you're tired at the end of the day and you are sick of recommendations and you just want to read what you're comfortable with, I also am totally okay with that. If I didn't start this channel, if I didn't get pushed into reading all these new authors by these wonderful goblins who follow me, I'd probably still just be rereading Wheel of Time. And would my life be better or worse? I have no idea. I'm very glad I found the stories I have, but it's important to remember that, you know, people need to have their comfort food, and I always think that's okay. Oh, this is going to be a spicy one. It starts with, writing degrees aren't useless, but
Something's about to go down.
oh yay. It's harder to write for yourself after you finish. You raise the bar so high to a point where if your first draft isn't perfect, you kill it. I shelved so many projects because my beginning wasn't descriptive enough. I am going to massively disagree with this. I think this sounds, in my opinion, like someone taking a personal experience and putting it onto all, because I know many people who have writing degrees who are able to really solidify their own process and actually be more comfortable with a bad first draft than people who don't have writing degrees, because they're so experienced with just the whole, yeah, I know my first draft is going to be bad, but you come back to it, you tweak, you fix, and that's the real value of an education in a degree like writing, in my opinion. It's not about, oh, I am a perfect first draft writer. No, in fact, people who are really cocky about their first drafts, I tend to be bothered by. The best writers I'm aware of, I am talked to, are well aware that their first drafts can suck butt. And they just have the process, they have a built-in system to come back to it and make it so that on draft 5, 6, what have you, it's reached the bar they taught themselves in education. And I think that's a failing of our education system, that we do not let people know, we don't put a greater emphasis on, while you're here, you're learning how to learn for the rest of your life. You're not just get through this writing block setup and move on and figure it out from there. The best thing I ever did for myself education-wise was focusing on learning how to learn well in college. Book covers have gotten really good. I have never been so enticed by only the covers until these last few years. Yep, this is just, I think, an undeniable truth. I can't even disagree with you here. And it's a gift of the internet. Now there are just more talented artists, more visible all over the place. And so publishers or indie authors can easily find someone who has a ability with art far above what industry standards were at for trad published books decades ago, and just do a direct deal with them. Or I've worked with Wraithmark now on finding artists to put on larger contracts, and yeah, it's great to find someone who's like, you're an artist who wants some regular paid work, we're a publisher who's trying to work on a series, let's make something splendid. And then you could even reach the point, of course, where, before, a lot of the times the artist wouldn't even read the book. It can be a part of the deal that they read the book, work with the author to find the exact right, perfect way to communicate specific tones, and it's just a more communicative, more healthy relationship. And the trad space, from what I'm seeing recently, is even adjusting to allow greater influence and control from authors at times in certain spaces. This is certainly not happening everywhere yet, because they're aware the more the author's vision comes through, and the more the people who actually understand what these specific fans want are able to influence the art, the better the final output will be. Granted, I also want to push back on this a little bit and say we are also in some of the most just clear copy and print paste type bullshit there has also ever been for cover arts, and I think that's why there is such a clear contrast between really well done art now and ones that look like doo-doo. And I try to be extra giving in fantasy news when I do like an art reveal for a cover of a book, because one, it's not review time, it's just, hey, you might be a fan of this book, let's check it on out. But I could be way harsher on the lack of originality still now to this day in trad publishing. It is so gross to see them look at a series that did well over there and go, maybe we can trick a grandma into buying our book if we just make it look a lot like that Game of Thrones book over there. Like, seriously? Stop. I know so many books that have gotten great success because they invested not in trying to look like something, but found a look that was specifically great for that book. And if you actually communicate the tone right, you can have a better result in terms of your marketing rather than something that's so bland and generic it can be passed over by your core fan base. If you put a gothic, bloody, badass cover on a book, you're gonna find your audience more, the grimdark seeking fellas or gals, than if you just put something that looks generic. That's part of the reason why I hate the saying that is still so popular to this day, that you don't judge a book by its cover. That's the fucking point of the cover.
If that's true, then why am I here?
The artists work really hard for you to judge a book by the cover they make for it. So please do. And if the job has been done well, that could actually lead you to some really great reads, because we have changed as an industry to a point where there is an actual more direct line between what the cover communicates and what you as a reader can expect. It's not just all bland, generic first Wheel of Time printing. I'm sorry to dunk on them again, but they're not great. Series fantasy stuff. Seriously, what happened to the Gathering Storms cover? What is this? Oh, James Toulos is coming through. We know James is going to have a hot take. All right, let's go.
I'm a fighter, mama.
Publishing, both indie and traditional, is being ruined by people who are ashamed that they like to read trashy romance. So authors just slap some dragons into it and pretend it's a fantasy adventure novel, even when 95% of it is just characters being horny. And they make it impossible for actual books in that genre to thrive. This I disagree with, because I find it to be dismissive of people who like specifically fantasy romance. It sounds like you're saying that these people would be buying these books anyway, even if there wasn't any fantasy elements to them. And as someone who has had many friends who are a fan of Actar and, Iron Flame and several other series, I even know someone who is quite into the Ice Planet Barbarians thing. They will have deep talks about the lore, however shallow or deep it may be, and that's an appeal for them. They do care about that. Granted, yeah, I think you would keep a good portion of the audience if you stripped all the fantasy stuff out, but would it still be big enough to have the appeal of just hitting everywhere? No. I think it hits so big because a lot of people are still kind of thirsting for that fantasy element. And I want to add on top of this, though, I do think you are right when it comes to specifically covers. I think we want it to be romantasy, but we also want to entice fantasy fans to pick it up. Certainly is something that's happening in romantasy a lot. It's why they've pulled back from the more overtly lusty covers from a male or female gaze standpoint, and instead they are going as bland as you can. You cannot tell Actar is necessarily romance from these mass covers because they don't want you to think that. The people who seek it out will find it, and the people who aren't necessarily seeking it out but would just like a female written fantasy story end up picking it up and they go, oh, okay. My perspective as a writer the last few years, I'm so worried about the audience I don't even have yet that I can't finish writing the book with the story I want to tell. I feel like balancing the two, write the story you want / write the book your audience wants, has become more difficult. I am probably wrong here. Please feel free to tell me this is a stupid viewpoint to have, because there are many successful authors who their number one consideration is, what do my audience want me to write? But for me personally, and this can go wrong, I'm always at least more interested on face value on an author who says, at least as part of their marketing, I did not consider what people want me to do. I told the story that was in my heart, and if people get upset by that, good, that causes discussion. Great, I'm in. I do not like artistic concessions, but I'm also a snobby prick. So, maybe that's not the case. I mean, there's so much room and argument and market value to have just, hey, we made the thing that most people could like possibly. But in my opinion, if you want me to respect you as an artist, show me something from your heart that I might hate. Don't show me something that you thought I might like. This might sound kind of extreme, pretentious, and over the top, but hey, that's what I'm here for. And just indulge me for a second, because you also need to consider, what do you want your legacy to be? If you do find success in this endeavor as an artist, what kind of artist are you? And that sounds insane, but hey, you're trying to write to find the success, to find an audience, to find some people to share your stories with. And if you manage to do that, do you want to be an artist who got there by doing something mass appeal, which is completely okay, and yeah, is somewhat technically easier, but still no easy task in today's day and age? Or do you want to be someone who represents art that pushes boundaries, is challenging, actually found maybe an unorthodox, more difficult way to its success? It is a part of being a creative, of being an artist. You want to look back on, okay, if I want this to be my life's work, what do I want my life's work to look like? Feels like if you're not a budding influencer or conventionally attractive for marketing, the odds of your book getting traditionally published are much, much lower. That's true. And the agencies telling you that's not true, it's just a bonus, yeah, they're full of shit, are mostly telling you this because they don't want you to stop sending queries, but it most definitely gets their authors opportunities. Not to mention, authors are sharing, more agencies / presses require you to put your social media and follower accounts in your queries now. Yeah, this sucks, and I'm unfortunately a part of this problem. It's something that is very unfair, but you also can't blame them for caring about the bottom dollar, and if someone's coming in with an audience, they have less of a risk. It is completely unfair to people who are just writing quality content and don't have that to come out with. But what I've had to tell myself, what I've had people tell me, because I feel guilty about this, is like, hey, you put the work in to be known in the fantasy space, people are curious about you, it's all right to profit off that. I still know that, like, no, my stuff that gets more attention probably isn't as good as someone who has purely dedicated all this time to the craft. And the world we live in is not fair. There's no answer here for me to be like, no, all art is valued equally, purely on its merit. I would be a jackass if I said that. But it's kind of just true on a wider scale too. I mean, just around the world, if you are, throughout all of history, attractive, you get treated better. And if you have social media followers now, you're more likely to get cast in movies. You're more likely to get opportunities in nearly every single industry that has even the slightest toe in entertainment. Because in terms of investing in a project, having any form of built-in audience, especially for things that are, as hit or miss as publishing, is crazy valuable. Readers nowadays are addicted to plot twists / subversions. We need more cliche books. There's always the argument of twists or subversions making fiction good, and plot is important. But if we had more well-written cliche books that focus more on storytelling and good characterization, maybe readers would enjoy themselves more instead of expecting every book they encounter to change their very brain chemistry. Yeah, I mean, this is just something that I feel like is a vocal minority online you hear from a lot, just saying like, oh, something's not original. But most people, especially as they get older in life, I think start appreciating this standpoint, this view more and more. I think when you're younger, you really are exposed to more stories that kind of blow your mind, right? Like if you're 16 and you watch insert Christopher Nolan film here, it's gonna blow your mind in terms of like how, narrative be communicated, and your brain's just getting that point where you can like read further into like media literacy and understand how that's interesting. But as you get older, you realize almost everything's been done. Like it's all been done to an extent, and we're seeing some really great slight evolutions and twists on things that have already been established as being like different and interesting. And there certainly are artists who are not just standing on the shoulders of giants, but doing their own waves now in the modern era, and I respect them so much for being able to find a way to be original today. But there's a reason that the parts of Dark Matter that I actually managed to like the most were the parts of the book that it was trying to be the least subversive with, and just embrace the roots of well-trodden paths to set itself up. They are well-trodden paths for a reason, and that can be comforting as a reader. It also can be great to immerse your story in cliches and tropes so that you can do something more of like a side B plot that's really zany and weird and not entirely lose your audience because they're hooked in on one angle that makes sense, and then in the left field you get to do something that's really different and creative. It's not as simple, and people like to act like storytelling is this binary thing where it's like you're original or you're not. But in reality, especially if you have like weaving plots and all kinds of developments in your story that may be seeding off of each other or not, originality becomes a lot more blurry of a concept. I could make a really good case that Star Wars, the original one, A New Hope, is super original if you look at it from a certain perspective. I also can tear that argument down if I look at it from a purely like just technically breaking down the beats of the story perspective. This is why I think like it's genuinely important to teach media literacy in schools. It's actually important as a part of like logic and reason. I think it'd be a good way to actually get kids interested in learning the basics of logic and reason, is you can communicate a lot of the core concept of it through learning how to evaluate media. And we don't require that in schools, even though it'd be a wonderful way to instill the values of fundamental rhetoric and logic that we also don't bother teaching kids, which I think is a large part of the reason we see so many people in the real world who are full-grown adults who can't realize A plus B equals C. Oh God, it's painful. I think we could actually undo so much societal damage if we taught basic media literacy as a guise to teach basic logic and reason. But we don't do that. And instead, you gotta learn like chemistry when you're 16 for some reason, which is great. I think 16-year-olds who want to learn chemistry should, but like if you know that's not your thing, I'd rather you learn basic logic first. I could make a whole video on that. Moving on. There are too many authors online giving new writers their advice. That's bold. They partially contradict each other and thereby scare away many young writers. There's nothing wrong with giving advice, but the most important thing is to just start writing and learn by making some smaller mistakes yourself. Yes, but I disagree with the sentiment behind what you're saying. I think most people, especially today, are smart enough to realize that, oh, there's all this contradicting advice out there. That means I need to just figure out what works for me. And that's really where I begin to respect or not someone giving writing advice, is if their main like, hey, there's a lot of different right answers here. Like, those are people whose writing advice I actually genuinely respect. Anyone who tries to even just make things as simple as like you're a plotter or a pantser, whatever that is, those two styles do exist. But again, it's not binary, right? Like, okay, is someone who does like half note taking and some bullets a plotter? No, everyone needs to find their own way. I would find a writer who writes in a way you very much so like structurally. Find out how they develop their process, because believe it or not, how you plan your book really does end up affecting how it finally comes across. You can tell a planned out book, in my opinion, from a not planned out book over 80% of the time. And if you really want to emulate that style, find out how they wrote their book. But in general, find out what works for you. That is the number one piece of advice. Try shit. And even if you successfully written a book under one style, then try under another. I wrote Rebels, Creed, and Breach of Peace as just kind of unplanned push on through, whereas Neon Ghost, to get it done, I had to really start structuring out the chapters and everything, and it came across two different styles, and I found out I like the latter more, even though my first success was with the former. Don't get pigeonholed. It's a creative process, and like any art form, going back to basics and trying a different path will improve your overall practice of that art. Writers need to stop trying to appeal to everyone or what's popular on the shelves and in the zeitgeist at the moment. You walk into a bookstore and half the books are the same with different names. Write the story you want to tell, not what you want to sell. Tired of someone trying to be the next Jordan or Butcher or Tolkien? You aren't. Create something original and make it good, please. So we're seeing a little bit of a trend. I think we're coming to the end of this topic because there's some redundancy. All I'm going to say in response to this specific point is one of the authors you selected was deliberately redoing Lord of the Rings. Jordan's Eye of the World is a love letter, a reimagining of Lord of the Rings. Someone doing something that has been done, but doing it really well and with a slightly different spin is creatively worthwhile and an interesting creative endeavor. Oreos were not the first Oreo, but they did it better. And I think that's perfectly valid and fine, and apply it to the book world too. And also, there is more original things being published right now than ever in the history of publication because of the internet. All these negative drawbacks people like to talk about because of the internet can largely be countered with what a million titles have been published that otherwise wouldn't have, that have given people representation, ideas, all forms of expression that the trad scene would have never considered putting on shelves, have now become mainstream successes. Some of them have been brilliantly well written, and the cost of all these walls coming down is, yeah, a lot of crap goes through. But luckily, the internet is full of thousands of people wading through the shit to find diamonds, and it's really easy to find a creator whose taste aligns with yours, who has the same values you do, or doesn't, but you know they're consistent enough for you to find the books you want by them having a different opinion. And then bam, if you're willing to put in a little bit of effort, you can find something that literally would not have existed a few decades ago. And I appreciate that more than I am annoyed by, yeah, some cheap pulp stuff is more popular now. Cool. Hot take. If your fantasy series is never finished, it shouldn't be considered among the best in the genre. Okay, disagree to an extent. I know there's a lot of hostility towards certain authors who have not finished things right now, but if you dropped a book, and this is coming from someone who doesn't necessarily like unfinished series, and it had a massive impact, like what if Sanderson died tomorrow, right? Never finished Stormlight Archive. Would you then just say the Stormlight Archive is disqualified? Oh no. I mean, if Brandon hadn't stepped in to finish Wheel of Time, would you say Wheel of Time is disqualified? It's just too blanket of a statement for me, and I think is trying to look at art from a did you satisfy fans perspective rather than what was its impact, what was its value as art. But this has just been your latest episode of Let's Debate. Let me know what you think of my responses in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already, and let's go ahead and submit some bookshelves over in the Discord server. Peace.